Good morning. We are live from River Valley Room.
Good morning. I'll call the November 4th meeting of the Utility Committee to order and start with acknowledging that we convene today on the traditional lands of Treaty 6, which is also the home of members of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Inuit, and non-status Indigenous peoples. We recognize the long history and contributions of Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land from time immemorial to the present. We are committed in the spirit of truth and reconciliation to working collaboratively to steward the land we share as we plan for a future for all citizens, and we acknowledge that we are all treaty people, bound to one another by the spirit and intent of treaty. As long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the river flows. I'll start with a roll call, first of all, of committee members. Councillor Paquette.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Jans.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Salvador.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Stevenson.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Tang.
Good morning.
Good morning. And we're joined, first of all, in studio by Councillor Wright.
Good morning.
Good morning. And just looking through the rest of the list here, I think that's it for now. We may be joined by some of our other colleagues later in the day. Take a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Please vote.
I'm a yes. Councillor Stevenson.
I'm a yes as well.
I'm a yes as well.
Oh, I guess I'm a yes. It's not coming up for me.
We have other vote.
Please display the vote. That is carried. Approval of the minutes.
I'll move approval of the August 26, 2022 Utility Committee.
Thank you. Please vote on approval of the minutes.
Apologies, just having trouble loading. I'm a yes.
Yes for me.
We have other vote.
Please display the vote. That is carried. Protocol items, I am not aware of any. Very good. Selection of items for debate. I'll start. We have speakers on item 7.2, so I'll select that to start. Are we having trouble? Go ahead, Councillor Stevenson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll choose 7.3, please.
I'll choose 7-1.
Okay. Okay, I believe that's all items. And it is requests to speak.
Mr. Chair, I'll move the Utility Committee hear from the following speakers in panels where appropriate. On item 7.2, Kyle Scholl, who will be in person, Linda Duncan, and Steph Neufeld.
Thank you. Please vote on hearing from those speakers.
We have other vote.
Please display the vote. That is carried. Requests for specific item time on the agenda, we have none. So we'll take them in the order they are listed. Are there any councillor inquiries this morning? Not aware of any then. Which takes us then to straight away to public reports and item 7.1. We'll presume there's a presentation. invite our delegation up. But also note, just while they're coming up, that we're joined by Mr. Jim Beckett, the Utility Committee Advisor. He's here with us today as well. Good morning.
Good morning, councillors.
Not sure that that's working, but there's a funny one over there.
I guess like means it's off.
Maybe try,
Is that better?
that's better. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, councillors. I'm Daryl Manning, Director of Regulatory for EPCOR Water Services, and I'm joined this morning by Santosh Apakoutan, who is the Senior Manager of Regulatory Finance. This morning, we're responding to 3 of the 5 motions that were issued July 9th, 2021, at the completion of the hearing for the most recent PBR applications for EPCOR water, wastewater treatment, and drainage services. We have a presentation, or we can go directly to questions, whichever you prefer.
Let's go through the presentation, I think, just for the benefit of the public.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So at the completion of the last PBR hearing, a number of motions were issued, most of which were incorporated into the compliance filing that was approved by City Council. An additional 5 motions were to be completed prior to the next application. This morning, we are speaking to 3 of those, and these are recommendations to improve disclosure of changes in accounting and capitalization policies, reporting the size of the EWSI workforce, and recommendations for setting long-term debt interest rates. The 4th and 5th motions will be brought forward in 2023, and these relate to the PBR metrics program, as well as a review of the use of deferral accounts. Next slide, please. So speaking to improve disclosure of changes in accounting and capitalization policy, just to provide a little bit of background of why changes occur and how it impacts us, EWSI maintains 2 sets of financial statements, one for external financial reporting based on International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFRS, and a second set based on regulatory accounting principles. And so our PBR applications, the PBR progress reports, anything you see from a financial nature brought forward by us aligns to the regulated financial statements. Wherever possible, we attempt to maintain consistency between the 2 approaches, but there are certain IFRS requirements that are not consistent with regulatory reporting. And these primarily relate to property, plant, and equipment, and just the treatment within the 2 systems. So the 2 examples that we've provided relate to capitalized interest and the treatment of abandonments. I won't go through them, but just gives you a bit of an example of how some of these are treated differently. Next slide, please. So there's really 2 key reasons that you would see changes in accounting policy. One is there's issuance of newer amended IFRS standards, which we align to on the financial reporting sides. And there's also revised interpretation of standards that are already in place. When those happen, we have the accounting treatment reviewed, typically by our corporate accounting group, and then often by our external auditors, which are KPMG. Once that's accepted as part of our financial statements, then those are flowed through to the regulated statements if they are applicable on a regulated basis. And that's done through historic practices, our own internal policies. We often refer to AUC Rule 026, which is the AUC's view of application of IFRS standards to a regulated accounting system. And through that, changes are made in the system. So we recognize that our process for communicating these changes hasn't necessarily been as transparent as we now think it should, given that there was, in the last application, one instance where a change was made and it wasn't caught and there was an impact. So what we are proposing this morning, next slide please, is that as part of our annual rate filing, we'll provide notification of any change in accounting principles so that it's fully apparent. As I think everyone is aware, we provide an annual rate filing to the city manager that speaks to the rates that are going to affect April 1st of the coming year. And so we'll simply enclose that in there so that there's total awareness. In terms of reflecting these through to ratepayers, whether they be positive or negative, we felt only material changes should be reflected because we just didn't want rates going up and down for relatively minor adjustments. So our proposal would be to use the non-routine adjustment financial criteria. And so that's already established within the bylaws. And it essentially says that we will only adjust rates if the revenue requirement is greater than $500,000 per year. And then in terms of approval, if it's less than $3 million, we apply to the city manager, they approve it, it's put into the rates. And if it's over a $3 million change, we take that to full city council for review. So that would be our proposal in order to provide greater transparency in terms of these capitalization policies, as well as reflect any changes through to ratepayers that are material. I'll now turn over to Santosh to talk about our next two motions.
Good morning, councillors. Is the mic working?
I'm not sure that it is, honestly. And it's more for the benefit of people online.
Good morning, councillors.
There we go.
EWSI does not actively track FTE information for its internal use. Cost, headcount, and other operational metrics are used primarily for internal decision-making. Staffing costs are one of the many factors that contribute towards the total cost of providing utility service, which in turn drives rates. As you're aware, next slide, please. As you're aware, EWSI's 3 utilities are regulated under the performance-based regulation, more commonly referred to as the PBR framework. Under the PBR framework, utilities are provided incentive to find efficiencies and reduce cost. At the same time, they're penalized if service standards or reliability standards are not met. Under EWSI's PBR, rates are adjusted annually using a formula of primarily using I minus X, where I equates to the forecast rate of inflation, and X is the efficiency, the minimum efficiency that EWSI must achieve to maintain its return or net income. This is important because staffing cost is one of the many factors that contribute towards providing utility service, and therefore greater emphasis is placed on overall cost. In the past 2 PBR applications, EWSI has realized significant cost savings, and those savings are now passed on to customers in the current PBR term. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, FTE information is not actively tracked, and hence a process was initiated to compile this FTE data for the purposes of this report, which was then compared against available headcount data. As you can see on this table, the summary comparisons for the 3 utilities are provided, which confirms there are minimal differences between the 2 measures for the 3 utilities. Further breakdown at the operational level for the 3 utilities is available under Appendix 2 of the report. Next slide, please. Given there are minimal differences between the 2 measures, EWSI proposes to provide headcount information in its future PBR applications to report the size of its workforce. Next slide, please. EWSI maintains an extensive capital program to provide safe and reliable utility services. Funding to support this capital program requires annual long-term debt issuances, which is secured using intercompany debt from its parent company, EUI. In establishing the interest rate for these long-term debts, EWSI uses what's known as a standalone principle, which is an accepted regulatory principle used by many utilities and approved by regulators such as the Alberta Utilities Commission. Using the standalone principle, an indicative credit spread and an indicative credit rating for EWSI's regulated Edmonton operations is obtained from the market, and that information is used in computing the cost of long-term debt. Under EWSI's PBR, cost of new long-term debt is established at the beginning of the PBR term and held throughout the term, meaning any rate fluctuations that happen during the term are not passed on to ratepayers, thereby maintaining stable, consistent rates. Next slide, please. Using the standalone principle, EWSI follows a three-step process in establishing the cost of new debt. First, Government of Canada 30-year bond yields are obtained from the banks. Second, an indicative credit spread for EWSI's regulated operations is obtained from banks. And finally, a 5 basis point transaction or financing cost is added to the previous two measures to arrive at the new cost of debt. I'd like to clarify that the indicative credit rating excludes the commercial high-risk operations of EWSI. The 30-year term of this debt closely aligns with the average useful life of the assets for which debt financing is used. Next slide, please. For setting the long-term debt interest rate, EWSI proposes to use the standalone principle as it's an accepted regulatory principle and reflects the indicative credit rating and risk inherent in EWSI's regulated operations. In addition, we recommend setting and holding the interest rate for the duration of the PBR term, as it benefits the ratepayers by providing stability. And finally, we recommend deferring introducing any new debt processes until the next PBR application. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. If it's okay, I think I'll go to Mr. Beckett to see if he has any comments on this report, just to maybe get all of our advice on the table, and then we can move to questions, if that's okay, Mr. Beckett.
That's what I'm here for. So for item number one, the transparency of accounting changes, you'll recall that the issue here is that, and I'm not suggesting by any means that this has occurred in the past, but as a regulator, you need to watch out for things that might happen in the future. And when accounting changes become available, there is a temptation for a regulated utility to hold off on implementing those accounting changes until after a rate decision, if it benefits the utility. Similarly, there's a temptation to always get the negative side of things into the rate application at the earliest opportunity. So it's an issue of dealing with the temptation of future management who may be a little less scrupulous than current management. How's that? I thought that was pretty good.
Seems fair to me, yeah.
And so it's important that that sort of temptation be eliminated by suggesting that changes to accounting procedures will be handled as non-routine adjustments. I believe EPCOR has addressed the issue properly, positive and negative, as you said. On size of workforce, I have trouble understanding why EPCOR is so reluctant to move to reporting full-time equivalents, particularly when other portions of EPCOR that are regulated by the AUC already report full-time equivalents. The analysis that they've done that FTEs are pretty close to being equal to headcount does give some comfort, but again, I just don't get it. I don't understand the difficulty. On the issue of long-term debt, I understand everything that EPCOR said there, but the one question that I think you should ask is who determines EWSI's standalone credit rating? Because that's what drives a portion of the setting of the interest rate. Since EWSI is not a standalone entity from a financial perspective, it seems like a bit of a conflict of interest if they're the ones who establish their own credit rating. So that's a question that I think deserves further exploration. But other than that, I thought that was a very good report.
Any commentary on the thresholds that were offered, the $500,000 and the $3 million thresholds? Does that seem reasonable in your view?
Well, that's existed for a while.
Yeah.
And I've always been a little bit uncomfortable that the city manager is being placed in a position of approving some of these adjustments without the benefit of my advice,
right,
and the utility committee's advice. So $3 million, maybe a bit on the high side from my perspective for that.
Oh, thank you. Before we move to questions, I just want to welcome the grade 6 class from Steinhauer School, which is in Ward Ipikuka Ipiotsi, and your counselor is Councillor Rice, and I'm not sure if she's online with us yet or not. But welcome to City Hall. Glad to have you with us. This is the best committee ever. Now, 2 questions then. Now, Councillor Jan's exempted this item, so give him the first opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I ask questions of Mr. Beckett?
Yes.
And also procedurally, this is for information. So we could receive it for information. We could also refer it back to EPCOR. Is that correct?
Yeah, either is appropriate. Or receive for information and offer a subsequent motion for, on whatever information is further required.
Okay. So Mr. Beckett, good cautions. I think if I hear you correctly, you would suggest amending the city manager approval piece so that it has to come back to the utility committee. I think that's a sensible recommendation. I would agree with that. If I'm understanding you correctly?
Well, I was suggesting that it might be appropriate to lower the threshold. I don't think all adjustments need to come back if they're relatively minor, but the only issue is $3 million too high or too low? And
do we have a sense of the patterns of adjustments in the past? How many adjustments have we seen?
Last term, over 5 years, there were 6 or 7 total. But
At what thresholds?
most were over 3 million. Some were not. The ones over 3 million related to SERP, which is a direction from council, as well as CORE, which was also a direction from council. The other ones, just going from memory, were under, and so that was the acquisition that the city undertook, the annexation south of the city, so that cost of the infrastructure there. There was also a negative non-routine adjustment that was processed related to reduced corporate cost when drainage was transferred. So I would say 2 went to council, but everything was brought to this committee. And so that's basically our standard practice. I mean, formally it would be approved by the city manager, but historically we brought everything forward in terms of a business case or those types of things, and we're happy to continue to do that.
Okay, thank you. And on the headcount question, Mr. Beckett, what would you like a refer back to make explicitly clear to bring back headcount?
Well, I guess that would be the gold standard, is to have headcount. The silver standard, something a bit less than that, would be to get a more comprehensive explanation as to why EPCOR can't report FTEs.
Yeah, so I think, just to be clear, Councillor Jens, we're getting headcounts. What we're not getting is FTEs.
Yes, pardon me. Yes, I meant FTEs.
May I respond?
Yes, indeed.
Please.
The reason we don't do FTEs on the water side is that it's a manual process. We don't operate that way. You use headcount in all of our financial statements. Mr. Beckett is right that it is done on the electricity side. It's a manual process. And we could certainly adopt that process and provide FTE if that's the direction. It's just a more costly approach, but we're happy to do that as well. We'll take whatever direction you feel is appropriate.
I understand this was a recommendation from 4 years ago, right?
No, this was an outcome of the last PBR application where administration asked for FTE. We responded that we do not have FTE. We could provide headcount. And at the end of the day, the motion came forward to look at that for future applications.
So just to be clear, Councillor Jans, I'll give you a bit more time. This is response to a motion made coming out of the rate application. And so essentially what you have is a report in response to those motions that has been vetted by administration.
Okay, and I hear those, or I think I hear some discomfort though from Mr. Beckett that it's not meeting the standard.
I don't know that it's discomfort. It's just seeking additional clarification. If EPCOR was to come back and say that tracking FTEs is going to cost $1 million a year, I don't think the benefit would be there. But if it's simply a case of replacing one manual process with a different manual process to meet the standard that is normal regulatory practice, then I think the direction should be do it. But I don't think we have enough information in front of us right now to get to that particular direction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the report. I thought it was really excellent. And I think, yeah, I think all of the questions that were raised have now been asked. Yeah, really appreciated the discussion on the formula that's used, the transparency that exists. I thought that was very helpful context. You know, really the only question of clarification I had a question about credit rating, but I think we went over, oh yeah, no, that was one of your questions, was who sets the credit rating for?
An external rating company that does EUI does that. So we commission them prior to an application come forward, and we include their report as part of the application. So it's not done by us, it's done by an external rating agency.
Oh, okay, great. And they fully understand the corporate structure and that you're not fully separate, but sort of an independent body.
Correct. It's done on a standalone basis, but our credit rating is A low, as is EUI. Right. So we're basically viewed as the same in terms of overall risk by the rating agencies.
But you're still scored separately?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, the only other question of clarification, I would not have selected the report for this, but since we are discussing it, I just noticed in the GBA plus analysis, it talks about the cost of providing water, wastewater, and drainage services is equitably allocated. And I think we've spoken in the past that I think the approach is an equal distribution. We don't have income-based charging, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so just a clarification there. I did also want to acknowledge city staff for the work and analysis that they did. I don't know whose team that was, but appreciated the narrative in the report that was provided. So thank you, thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Councillor Tang.
Great, thank you very much. I guess, Mr. Beckett, do you have a response to that question in terms of who sets the rating, and does that give you comfort?
I'm good.
Oh, you're good. Okay, that's good to know. I thought the report was technical, but I certainly learned a lot, so I really appreciate that opportunity. I was wondering, you know, so I understand these 5 pieces came out of the last rate setting. You know, under a pandemic situation, you know, water use was quite different than non-pandemic years. So that context is pretty different from now. And I guess I'm just wondering if you can speak to that a little bit. And do you feel that these 5 areas of exploration is just as relevant today as it was, you know, kind of during pandemic when it first came up?
Yeah, I certainly think probably the 3 we're speaking today would apply because they're more financial. The 2 motions that we're bringing forward in 23 would be somewhat impacted by the pandemic. And so those relate to performance metrics. And obviously, if we don't have enough crews on the road or pipes are blocked because people are using higher numbers of wipes or those types of things, those impact our metrics. So that would be obviously COVID related. And the deferral account was introduced in the last PBR application because there was discussions around our consumption forecast. Because what had happened during the pandemic is that commercial dropped significantly. As everyone went home, residential went way up. And so there was a lot of discussion because we were in the midst of the pandemic at that point in time. Will it return to normal, and when will it return to normal? And so there was a difference of opinion. And if we were too low in our forecast, ultimately we would over-earn because of that. If we were too high, we would under-earn. And administration said, well, it's a temporary measure. Let's put in a deferral account. That way we're protecting the utility from over and underages, ultimately, I guess, protecting the ratepayer to some degree. But then the discussion was it's a temporary measure and we need to come back and review it more fully to ensure that it's something that we want to maintain going forward. Our perspective is, no, it's not needed. We're happy to take the risk of consumption. That's part of the core PBR. But that's certainly scheduled for 2023.
Wonderful, thank you. And then just on the topic of risk, appreciating that it's EPCOR taking on the risk and rather than, passing it on to the customer, because we do want stable, predictable rates, which I think we're seeing the challenges in deregulated side that's highly fluctuating and actually is incredibly burdensome to families trying to make ends meet. Just on the issue of like rising interest rate, like that, there's feels like there's a lot of risk in this realm. How, can you just speak to that a little bit in terms of EWSI absorbing those risks?
Well, as Santosh reviewed in the second of the motions that he reviewed, that the way the PBR works is we establish an interest rate for all 5 years, and it's the same rate. And right now it's 3.5%. When we go out to borrow today, it's certainly higher than that. It's north of 5. And so the way the system works is we have 3.5% built into the rates. We pay 5. We absorb that out of our net income, and the consumer doesn't see the impact of that. So we're effectively sheltering the ratepayer from fluctuations in interest rates, both positive and negative.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And then just on that equity piece that Councillor Stevenson brought up, I think in the past, at this committee, or in the past year, we've broached that topic and kind of looking at and just thinking about the tools we have now in terms of GIS and mapping based on socioeconomic status, neighborhoods, and water usage. I guess that piece of that is that equity lens is that something on your radar to kind of address down the road so that we can have more robust GBA plus?
Absolutely. One of the things that we plan to bring forward next year is an entire rate strategy to have that discussion prior to the next PBR application. And so equity is a component of that, but it's a fairly large discussion in all honesty, because today we're using cost-based rates, and they're, to the best of our ability, no cross-subsidization between customer classes. And ultimately that's a decision you can make. It's a policy decision. But it's something we're not doing today, but we will have that discussion.
And I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's something we've talked about with a number of different utilities is, where do we apply the equity lens? Is it on the changing the rate structure, or is it on subsidizing those that, need an income supplement to pay the rate? And it's essentially an open question, I think, for us right now.
Yeah.
Just quickly, on the head count versus FTE, is it substituting one manual process for the other?
It's not overly onerous. We just thought, it's more efficient to provide what we have, but if the direction's FTE, we're happy to do that. It's not overly onerous. We'll just take that on.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay. I have no other questions. On the second round, Councillor Jans?
Sure. We talked about FTE. I was just wondering, is there a review or a calculation around compensation and other costs of labor that factors into this?
Part of the inflation adjustment is based on Alberta hourly earnings. And so when we go through a rate increase, which happens every year, we get information from Stats Canada, and then that determines the rate. And in there, of course, is their hourly earnings. And that's reflected at about 35 or 40%, depending on the utility and the overall inflationary increase. And then that's audited. So when we provide the information to the city manager, it includes the audit and all of the history in terms of here's the inflationary increases we used.
How about consideration of other sort of efficiencies of operations?
Well, there is an efficiency factor that's deducted from that, and currently that's 0.25%. So if inflation is 2%, we ultimately increase rates by 1.75, and that rate is 0.5 in drainage. So it's different by utility.
So in terms of the operations and the staff and efficiencies there on projects and production, that's factored in through that metric.
That's right.
Do we have some sort of a peer review against other groups in terms of, they use their costs are around X, our costs are around Y, maybe are we too generous with our materials? Are we is our, just considering different factors, how accountability comes to play?
Yeah, I think that's part of our ongoing process. Under the PBR system, we're incented to find efficiencies. And so that's obviously what we attempt to do. And then at the beginning of each PBR application, the system is rebased, and those are returned to ratepayers. So that's part and parcel of the overall structure of the PBR system, as opposed to a cost of service type regulatory structure where there is no incentive on the utility to find efficiencies.
And the determinations of necessity of work?
Sorry, can you say that again, please?
The determinations of necessity of work, of whether certain projects are nice to have or must have?
That's part of the PBR application. And so we provide business cases that provide essentially justification for any project over $5 million in water and wastewater treatment and over $10 million in drainage. And so it covers 75 or 80% of the total capital spend. And each one is 25, 30 pages of justification. So we're assessed on our delivery of that plan, and that's part of our PBR progress report that we come back annually and present.
Right. So maybe, Mr. Chair, may I ask you to Councillor Tang's point, or I think it was Councillor Tang, the point about having that conversation around equity and, as you said, subsidy and those different sort of values pieces. When in the cycle should we be saving our questions, or when should we be having conversation about that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Jantz. We've had this conversation. This is not exclusively an EPCOR or a water utility conversation. We've had this with waste as well. And there's, neither approach is right or wrong. We just haven't landed on a council philosophy on this. So I'm not quite sure where to take it, but I don't know that it's attached to any one utility before we land on a strategy, if I can say it that way.
Yeah, because I think it'd be if we came up with that philosophy with Mr. Beckett's input, and it would probably be much more helpful for our guests as well if they kind of knew, if we kind of pinned down some sort of a lens first that they could then respond to reports accordingly. Because I realize probably on this report today is not the time to be having that meta philosophical conversation.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to scramble to something in this. I'd rather have a more deliberate conversation with all of council, and I know I'm doing it out loud in real time. Remember the conversation around waste, and it's so writ large. Do we come up with a spectrum of rates, that become very specific, almost to the potentially to the household, or do we have one rate fits all, and the supplements to that household is where the equity conversation takes place? if we have to do rate, just as an example, we have to do rate filings that get to 30, 40, 50, 80 different rate structures to, you know, accommodate different situations, that's an impossible exercise when we get to a PBR stage. That's one aspect. That's not the only aspect. So I think we need to take this somewhat offline and find a way to have that council conversation and figure out which way we want to go on this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Tang?
Yeah, great, thank you, and thank you for that clarification, Mr. Chairs, because it sounds like that conversation is coming, and, you know, I think it's also on, of course, radar. So I just want to go back to the water versus electricity headcount versus FTE. So, Mr. Beckett, essentially what you're suggesting, you know, while they're similar in quantitative measures, in quantity, is the goal then is to align more with AUC so that it's a bit more comparable, and I see head nodding if you want to comment.
That's correct. I'm not an advocate of pursuing consistency for the sake of having consistency, but if there's minimal effort involved in being consistent, then I think it's reasonable to be consistent.
Yeah, and I'm curious, in other provinces where, you know, energy and water are regulated separately, do they have sort of that consistent measure, and is this a sort of common industry practice?
I'm not familiar with how other provinces do it, but I believe it is fairly standard industry practice.
Okay, I feel like you want to comment. You want to comment by all means. Nope. No, the third one's a charm.
But we're saving your property tax.
Again, just for the record, my name's Sean Bradford. I'm the Senior Vice President for Water Canada. A good question around how things are reported in the water space. In my experience across North America, the use of FTEs aren't prevalent. It's really more about costs, and it's what's our labor costs, and those are typically included in an application and rolled up. They're not looked at on a per employee basis. But again, as we've said here today, if it's the decision and the request of utility committee to report FTEs, we can, and it's a manual process, and we'll adjust course and provide the data as requested. But it's not something that, in our other utilities that are regulated in the United States, we don't report FTEs. We report labor costs.
And if that is a direction from this committee, it's not an onerous exercise. It's not like a $1 million.
I don't think it's $1 million. No.
Okay, great, thank you. That's all my questions. I'm happy to move the receipt of this report for information. I understand there's potentially subsequent, so I'd like to move that November 4th, 2022 Financial and Corporate Services Report, FCS 01533, be received for information.
Thank you. So motion on the floor. I just have one more question. And if there's anybody else that has any questions, please click on it. I think we're close to done. This is a rate-based comparison. So there was I think it was Councillor Jans that asked about, you know, comparison essentially to like a peer review comparison or comparison to peers. That's done at the rate level, right? So when we do a rate filing, we look at what rates are in other jurisdictions, municipalities close by, that kind of thing. It's done at that level.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Beckett, please. Yeah.
Well, there is another level of comparison. It's called benchmarking, where you, and it's usually something that's provided by some other commercial entity that gathers up information from a number of utilities on a cost perspective, and then compares you to the mean for certain activities. That's a very intensive and very expensive activity, and it's also pretty subjective. So the normal default is to look at rates.
Yeah, and and in the context of nearby municipalities, I would say is generally what we do. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Certainly the surrounding ones, Calgary, Vancouver. We sometimes go to Eastern Canada to get things that are a little more comparable because, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into rates. And just for example, Vancouver has very clean water. So In comparison, our water tends to be a lot dirtier, so there's a lot more treatment. So you have to consider those types of factors as well. But yes, we use quite a range.
Yeah, and I know we get into this on waste, but do we get into it with water and drainage and the like, where there's a blend of taxpayer support and rate support?
You see that more on the wastewater or stormwater side,
Right.
and that, and yes. So where we know that, we certainly indicate that in the charts we provide, but we don't have full visibility.
And it's long, sorry, go ahead.
And just as a point, Mr. Chairman, in the last PBR, there was a request made by city administration and city council to move the cost of fire hydrants into the water rate. And there was a subsequent adjustment to the tax rates there to counter that. So those are, again, typically policy-driven decisions. So when we start to look at, try to get an apples-to-apples comparison of rates, there are those a bit nuanced conversation that we typically try to have, because there are different factors that go into building a rate. And again, we've made the decision here to move a previously applied to tax to the utility bill, and that's certainly appropriate, but it does tend to make it a little bit more challenging to really look at things apples to apples.
Right. However, that has been essentially our method for the last, is to compare on a rate basis, on a rate payer and a rate basis, and that's where we kind of do that peer review.
Yes.
It's included in the application. It's also included as part of the progress reports.
Right.
And at one time, it was codified in the rates and procedure bylaw that we had to provide rate comparisons as part of our application. So, yes.
Yeah, okay. Those are all my questions. Any other questions for our delegation? Not seeing any. There's motion on the floor. Anyone to speak? Councillor Tang to close.
I guess, excellent work on this. I look forward to seeing how these various pieces, including the piece that will be forthcoming next year, and how that, gets translated into the next cycle for the rate setting. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mr. Beckett, for your advice on this. That's it.
Great. Thank you. Please vote on receipt of information. Having an e-scrag problem?
Waiting on one vote.
We have all the votes, yeah? Please. Oh, we're missing a vote?
Missing one. Councillor Piquet.
Yeah, it didn't come through for me. I'm a yes.
Thank you, Councillor Piquet. We have all the vote.
Please display the vote. Well, you've got all the gremlins today. Now, something's odd, because Councillor Principe is not on committee. And I'm not even sure she's here, so I'm not sure she can be opposed.
Yes, that is being corrected.
Okay. So
Just to let you know, I am here,
Oh, are
and
you
I
on?
did not oppose it.
okay, sorry.
Just for
Karen.
clarification.
Yeah, glad to have you. I didn't know you had joined. I think that's a 6-0 vote, so we'll call that carried unanimously and move to a subsequent motion. Councillor Tang.
Sure. Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that administration work with EPCOR Water Services, Inc. to include the size of the workforce, including actual and forecast full-time equivalents FTEs in its future performance-based rates PBR applications.
Great, thank you. Motion on the floor. Questions? Speaking to? I'll just quickly say that we talked a little bit back and forth about receipt of information and a subsequent versus just this motion. Because the report had sort of a 3-part report to it, and most of it was seen as adequate by committee, that I felt this was the better way to go, with a receipt of information and then a subsequent on this one piece. And I think committee agreed with that approach. So that's all I have to say. Councillor Tang to close.
Yeah, and I think this kind of captures some of the conversation here. And I take Mr. Beckett's point that, let's not do consistency for the sake of consistency. However, hearing that it's not super, resource intensive, let's move towards that consistent practice. So thank you very much for this.
Great, thank you. Please vote.
In favor.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We have all the vote.
Please display the vote. And that's carried. Great, thank you. That takes us now then to item 7.2, watershed management update. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Kent Snyder. I'm the branch manager for the Planning and Environment Services branch. And we're here today to share with committee an update on important work that supports the city plans, big city move of greener as we grow, and the city's climate resiliency strategy. The city has a goal in the climate resiliency strategy that Edmonton's water supply is secure and safe for current and future Edmontonians. Urban growth, coupled with climate change, will impact our city, and we need to take a proactive approach to addressing these challenges. I'll now turn the presentation over to Chandra Tamaris, Director of Environment and Climate Resilience, to provide details regarding the report which suggests the City of Edmonton prepare a watershed management framework, and also she'll give an update on the North Saskatchewan River Regional Plan status. Thank you.
Thank you. If we could move to the next slide, please. Climate change is changing everything, and it's causing cities to rethink how we manage both our natural and our built environment in order to build resilience to these climate changes. Healthy watersheds are important to the livability of a city. Edmontonians are at the forefront of two important trends for the region: continuing to develop a healthy city while also preparing for what will be one of the greatest challenges of the future: protecting and enhancing land, air, water, and biodiversity. Next slide, please. Currently, the North Saskatchewan River is Edmonton's only source of drinking water. And in order to ensure the future livability of our city, we need to be proactive in protecting our watershed. Watershed management is a proactive approach to manage both the land and water resources in a comprehensive and integrated way. A watershed is a term used to describe the land and water that are connected and how they collect, drain, and move water. All of these elements are being impacted by a changing climate. The responsibility of watershed management is shared by federal, provincial, and municipal governments, as well as landowners, utilities, and industry. It is a collaborative endeavor. There are several existing watershed management initiatives currently underway by stakeholders in the North Saskatchewan watershed. This includes the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, which is the provincially designated watershed planning and advisory council for our watershed, as well as EPCOR, our water utility. EPCOR has important watershed management initiatives they are actively advancing, including their upstream source water protection plan and their downstream integrated watershed management plan. These two plans support EPCOR's comprehensive approach to watershed management. Attachment 1 of the Council report outlines the many initiatives EPCOR is advancing. Attachment 2 of the Council report does not highlight EPCOR's ongoing upstream and downstream watershed management leadership that's outlined in Attachment 1, and as such, Attachment 2 should not be read in isolation. The City of Edmonton has a number of policy and strategic documents, including the City Plan and the Climate Adaptation Strategy. These provide direction related to water and watershed management. Furthermore, as the municipality and land use regulator, the City of Edmonton can activate some municipal tools that other stakeholders operating within our boundaries do not have jurisdiction to use. Next slide, please. Effective watershed management requires integrated land and water planning. Under the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, regional plans, which are delineated by watershed boundaries, is the Government of Alberta's mechanism to advance this integrated planning. Regional plans, once developed and approved by the province, are statutory and take precedence over other plans. Work began in 2014 to develop a North Saskatchewan Regional Plan, or you'll hear us often say NSRP. However, the current focus for the Government of Alberta has been to review and update the Lower Athabasca Regional Plan and the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan. Administration has connected with Alberta Environment and Parks colleagues on the status of the NSRP. At this time, it's unknown when the NSRP will be revisited or exactly what the content of the plan will be. However, other regional plans include content that would have various watershed protection approaches that would need to be activated by the City of Edmonton and other stakeholders. Administration will continue to monitor the NSRP development and will participate in engagement opportunities when and if they become available. Next slide, please. In support of the City Plan implementation and climate resilience, a City of Edmonton framework for watershed management will be developed. This framework will not duplicate existing work already underway by city stakeholders such as the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, but will focus on guiding when and where the City of Edmonton should be activating municipal levers to address water security and urban watershed health. This will help make Edmonton more resilient to a changing climate while we prepare to welcome 1 million more residents to our community. Once the framework is completed, administration will provide an update to Council, including implementation considerations. Next slide, please. Thank you. This concludes our presentation, and we look forward to answering and addressing Council's questions and comments.
Great, thank you. We'll now ask our delegation to step back, and we'll hear from our speakers. First of all, we have Kyle Skoll. I hope I have your name right, Kyle. Please come forward. Second, we have Linda Duncan. And you please come forward as well, Ms. Duncan. We'll hear from everybody, all of our speakers first in a panel, and then we'll ask questions. I'll explain that in a moment. Third is Steph Neufeld, who I believe is joining us remotely from EPCOR, though. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Thank you very much for coming down. Appreciate your attendance. I know you've been here before, but just so everybody knows the rules, we each have 5 minutes. There's lights on the dashboard just over in front of you. Green for 4 minutes, yellow for 1 minute, last minute. Red means 5 minutes is up. And then once everyone's made their presentations, councillors, those here and those online, will each have a chance to ask questions. So please go ahead. Thank you again for being here.
Good morning, committee. Pleasure to see you. I'll keep my comments fairly short and sweet. You were fairly close, Mr. Chairperson, with my name, Sholey, but I get called lots of names. This morning, I'm pleased to be here wearing my planning technician hat with Smoky Lake County. Primarily, I'm here to answer questions later, but just to say that I'm also the vice chair of the board for the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, and I know that we're joined by Steph, the board chair. Smoky Lake County is putting forward a resolution to the RMA next week, the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, further to the North Saskatchewan Regional Plan, and resuming progress on that important work. We're also shepherding an initiative to see the North Saskatchewan designated as a heritage river, as I've met with several of you, you will know and be familiar with that work. The city has available to it statutory and non-statutory tools, and it's important that each of those tools are undertaken in a collaborative way, in a regional way. Once again, very happy to answer any questions if there do happen to be some, but I will leave it there, and some very knowledgeable people will speak to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sholey. Ms. Duncan.
Thank you very much. Thanks, councillors. It's always good to be before you. And it's great to have Mr. Sholey here. And we, of course, congratulate him on his hard work on having our river designated as a heritage river. Long overdue, and Smoky Lake deserves a lot of accolades for their hard work. I'm speaking on behalf of the North Saskatchewan River Valley Conservation Society, and we're very supportive of the report by the administration and the calls for the need for watershed management plan for our city. Regrettably, they appear to be suggesting that that can be done simply in-house behind closed doors with EPCOR. And that's disappointing to us because there are a good number of organizations up and down the river, and there are a good number of community-based organizations that have been watchdogging their creeks for quite some time and making sure that those areas are protected, that the creeks are safe, and that the land is protected. The administration has reported that there are already a good number of gaps and problems with the management of the watershed. Understandably, EPCOR's key interest is water quality and providing safe drinking water to Edmonton and the drainage. But that's not a full watershed plan. A watershed plan, as the administration has stated, deals with water and land. And we would encourage council that you make use of the existing initiatives that are already ongoing in the city. There's no need to start yet another standalone process. There's no reason why watershed planning couldn't be expedited through many mechanisms. The modernization of the river valley. To their credit, the city administration actually identified what does the community want to have done in the ravines. So there's already that process, and hopefully that's moving forward. There's the rezoning initiative. There's the River Valley bylaw initiative. And then there's district planning. And we'd like to suggest it's been a bit of a mistake that that's only been based on what happens actually in the community. But many of the communities along the river and along the ravines make use of the ravines. And there's no reason why in those consultations they couldn't also take a look at what do we need to do in the way of setbacks or additional protections to protect those watersheds. So we are 100% supportive of the call for an Edmonton-based watershed. It's very clear in law that Edmonton has the sole jurisdiction to do that and has the power to enact bylaws. It may be noted that Calgary has already moved forward. Now they have the advantage that the province completed their river plan, and ours is dragging on, sadly. And we would also like council to be, as Mr. Scholey says, encouraging the province to move forward with that plan, and that Edmonton take a more active role in that. But Calgary already has a source water protection plan, a source water protection council, and policies for its council. And those are, I think, enacted by bylaw. It's very important for the protection of our watershed that there be binding rules and not just suggestions. We have a whole array of very progressive policies in the city, but none of that is made binding. And so decisions are continuously made on expansion of light industrial or residential areas and so forth along the ravines and along the river, without due consideration to an overriding policy under bylaw that would state, no, you must also take in consideration potential impacts to the watershed. So we are 100% in favor of moving forward, but we would like it to be open, transparent, and participatory. Way back in 2002, the city did a review of setbacks, and they consulted with more than 30 independent organizations, a list of about a dozen experts. So they simply did that for setbacks and made a number of recommendations and serious concerns with development imposing into the river valley and ravines. So we would like to encourage that council open it up. We realize that the EPCOR-sponsored organization that Mr. Scholey is also associated with does good work, but it's not the only voice. And we need to make sure that all the interests are considered in the development of a watershed plan. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Third, we have Steph Neufeld.
Sure, thanks. So I'm Steph Neufeld. I am the chair of the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. I'm a watershed manager with EPCOR and have been for almost 13 years now. I'm an aquatic biologist, and so my work is really looking at the ecological function of watersheds and how land and water affect water quality and climate change in terms of water supply. So my work for EPCOR is really looking at sort of the upper source water protection area, and now more recently looking at an integrated watershed management plan for the sort of all the sort of discharges into the North Saskatchewan River. We talk about the regional plan not being developed, and that is true, but there is a water quality management framework downstream, and those water quality management frameworks are sort of the crux of what makes a regional plan useful. And so what it really says, because they're 50th percentiles and 90th percentiles, is we can't change water quality negatively in the river downstream or at Devon or upstream at Rocky Mountain House. So at this point, there really is a limit to further degradation on the river. And so we've really adopted that at EBCOR. So our integrated watershed management strategy is no net increase in loads for those parameters of concern. There are 21 parameters of concern, and we want to ensure that water quality in the North Saskatchewan River is good and stays good over the long term, and our integrated watershed management plan integrates that. We are not working in silo. We have many sort of open teams. We're currently starting a Urban Creek watershed project, and that is sort of first of all, working with Creek Watch, a citizen science group that collects water quality data. We collect our own water quality data. We have now commitments under the Water for Life action team where we're going to make all that creek data public and sort of advance collaborative creek watershed planning. So if anyone is interested in participating on that, I have extended that to the coalition, the River Valley Conservation Coalition, as well as anyone. It's an open committee and it's collaborative stakeholder, what's happening in our urban creeks. And so we have lots of initiatives and lots of different hats that we all wear. So Kyle will wear one. I represent the Alberta Water Council. I'm on the board of that, but wearing an ENGO hat. So watershed management in Alberta is extremely complex. It's not clear and it can be a little frustrating. So when we're looking at sort of these different approaches for integrated watershed management, we really have to look at all the different initiatives, which are summarized in Appendix or Attachment 1, and find those touch points and those common ground. And thankfully, we now have water quality objectives, triggers and limits that are set downstream of our cities, so we can start to make sure that that can be regulatory binding once the regional plan comes into effect. So I think it's a good news story, and we need to continue to work collaboratively, and we're committed to doing that. So, our door is open, and we're happy to sort of continue those collaborative processes. So, and I'm happy to take any questions, whenever that can occur.
Thank you. That can occur right now. So we'll go to questions of our speakers. And I'll start with Councillor Tang.
Great. Thank you so much for all of your time today and the insights. Maybe I'll start with Kyle. So you mentioned statutory and non-statutory tools. So just to be clear, though, Heritage River is the non-statutory, and then the NSRP, it's the statutory that you were referring to. Were there others?
Thank you for the counselor. Thank you for the question, Councillor. That's correct. The Heritage River Initiative and the ultimate designation as a Heritage River for the North Saskatchewan is a non-statutory program, which means that individual participating communities retain the tools in their toolbox that they have, be they statutory or otherwise. But it's about coordinating and collaborating decision makers and administrations to be providing good advice in terms of watershed management. EPCOR is a leader in watershed management, and as Steph mentioned, there's a plethora of actors in this space. And so the NSRP, the North Saskatchewan Regional Plan, would be a statutory tool and would be more of a I guess, not forceful, but more helpful, I guess, in advancing in a concise direction. I'll leave it there.
Great. And then for your RMA resolution, the convention is just in a few days here. And then have you ever had that conversation with the counterpart, the Alberta municipalities, for that kind of resolution work?
Again, thank you for the question. So Smoky Lake County being a rural municipality, just a short 2-day canoe ride downriver from where we're sitting, not a member of AM, Alberta Municipalities, so a slightly different membership there. We haven't advanced that conversation at AM.
Well, I'll be very interested to hear the outcome of the convention this time. And then just to be clear, the Heritage River status is not fully there yet, correct?
That's correct, Councillor, and thank you for mentioning that. Provincial and federal government jointly announced the nomination of the North Saskatchewan across Alberta. That's 718 kilometers, touching upon something like 15 municipalities, the city of Edmonton being one of them, of course. That nomination paves the way for the ultimate designation, hopefully next fall. But that work is actively ongoing. We currently have an engagement process, public engagement, public input that's helping inform that designation plan that we're working on now with partners, again, including the City of Edmonton.
Right, and then this will just be an added tool to further protect the river and the watershed. Thank you very much. And then to Ms. Duncan, I absolutely appreciate your comments around the process being more open, transparent, and participatory. I guess, do you have any response to the comments around some of the existing collaborative citizen group that are working in the watershed, working with the Watershed Alliance that was mentioned earlier? Oh, sorry, you have to turn your mic back on.
Oh, the red light means it's on. Okay.
Yes.
By the way, we are the Conservation Society, not the coalition, and so EPCOR is not even aware of all the organizations. And
I was going to follow up on that later.
And they are also a terrific group that's very, very active. We would be very disappointed if the city continued with simply deferring to EPCOR doing the consultation. The statutory power is within the City of Edmonton, and it's very important that the city be directly engaged in this in some way. And as we've recommended, there are already a lot of good mechanisms that the city, to their credit, have initiated, like the district plans, like the modernization process, and the rezoning. Again, the initiative on the Creek Watch is simply testing the water, and by the way, that the parameters are far too narrow. My group, the Keepers of the Creek, have been doing that for 20 years, and the parameters that are being done are far too narrow for catching the industrial effluent. We're concerned that there be bigger issues also looked at, and that's the land use, that's protection of the biodiversity, future climate issues, and Indigenous interests. And that needs to be led by the city and can be ably done through your existing initiatives. And so we would encourage that the city administration infuse the watershed management in more detail into those initiatives that are ongoing. I think that the modernization initiative is going to come forward again this month. There's been lots of consultation. They've already looked into what are people's views in the communities on the creek beds and so forth. So it's very important for the city to remember that they have a regulatory power. The provincial plans is only optional. The cabinet doesn't have to make those binding. They could choose not to make them binding under the current regime. Yeah. But the city has its own power, and only the city can determine what the rules are for the watershed within Edmonton.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, and I'll follow on that point, Ms. Duncan. Appreciate the perspectives, and I think that's certainly a question I'll ask city staff in terms of how we are infusing this work with many of the other initiatives underway. I guess just from my understanding, what I had understood is currently proposed as a first step is doing the desktop study. So just wondering if there's a specific desire, or do you think there's a space for community involvement in that aspect of it? Or do you just mean more broadly, more globally moving forward, having that participation?
Oh, thank you, Councillor. Yes, absolutely. I think that the community organizations can contribute a great deal. Most of our organizations include academics, scientific researchers, and so forth. And I think, and also people with legal skills who have dealt with the issues of land use and conflicts and impacts on the ravines and the river. So I think a lot can be provided, and I think that we learned when we did the previous look back in 2002, there are serious issues. And I think there can be a lot contributed through those processes.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Neufeld, I just wanted to touch on, I did think it was interesting to read in the first attachment, I think, around some of the citizen data collection, recognizing some of the gaps that have been noted today. And that was specifically around water quality. I was wondering if there's any programs or precedents in terms of expanding that to have citizen involvement for the collection of other types of data around land use. So for example, erosion, biodiversity, and if there are opportunities for us to build on that here.
Sure. So EPCOR initiated a science and knowledge mobilization group for the North-South River, and the City of Edmonton is on that, as well with Creek Watch. So the idea behind that is, as part of the bigger watershed water quality monitoring program, is to start to look at benthic macroinvertebrate communities and fish communities on some of our creeks, not just our urban creeks, but including the urban creeks, but all the way up the watershed and downstream to the Saskatchewan border, and looking at those sorts of metrics, including riparian health and partnerships with cows and fish, who do a lot of that really good work. The sort of watershed metrics really start with delineating what your urban watersheds are. And so we've done that. And, you know, a lot of those watersheds are outside of the city into county boundaries. So it's a collective. Some of those are really large, right? You know, 1,400 square kilometers. So it really matters to have that collaborative approach. So we do water quality monitoring. There are some hydrometric stations, but we'd like to see more. So we're working with the province of Alberta to try to get more hydrometric stations on our urban creeks, which have not been prioritized because they're low flow, and then do some biodiversity monitoring, starting with benthic macroinvertebrates and fish. And that work is part of work with Alberta Environment and Protected Areas.
Great. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And I think, again, I'm thinking around the land use as well. And I don't know the other metrics, but again, I know a number of my communities along the river often point out areas of erosion or bank instability. Just wondering if that's also pertinent information that could be collated into the data that you're collecting already.
Yeah, we have just actually got an adaptation resilience climate student, part of that art program through the University of Alberta. And we have a lot of academic researchers on there. So we're doing groundwater reconstruction for the city, but we're also going to, for the first time, try to hindcast previous flow regimes. So look at what these streams look like pre-development or pre-human disturbance to help us set metrics for restoration of creeks in the urban environment. And so what it will do is look at the natural hydrograph, and then we'll try to, because they're art students, they can kind of think outside the box and look at restoration solutions for land, you know, land use, right? Watersheds are land and water combinations. They're not just our creeks. So can we start to increase wetlands, managed through stormwater management facilities, dry ponds in sort of a collaborative way so that we can try to restore some of the hydrology in a stream. Once you restore that hydrology, then you deal with a lot of those erosional issues. If we can start to set metrics of what the streams sort of look like before, we can start to start to plan to achieve those targets over the long term and work towards creek restoration, not just, you know, maintenance of current conditions. And so that's what we have a student working for 8 months on. We're also partnered with the University of Alberta, who is going to get some PhD and master's students working on this urban hydrology problem.
Great, thank you so much.
Councillor Salvador.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to all our speakers for being here. Most of my questions have been answered, but just to Mr. Scholey, just trying to understand, what is the city's role in supporting the heritage designation?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I'll speak to the screen since you're up there. The city has thus far been providing us assistance through the Indigenous Relations Office, advice in terms of engagement and broadcasting our message. The ongoing governance structure and implementation of the designation plan, ultimately once it's completed, is something that we hope to return to City Council or committee, I should say, with an update on next spring or summer, as that was some of the questions that Mayor Iverson provided in his conditional letter of support from August 21. But we're very grateful for City's input to date, wisdom to date, and it is truly a collaborative project encompassing, as I mentioned, more than a dozen municipalities.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your work, and I look forward to eventually seeing that in front of us. And then just to Ms. Duncan, you mentioned opportunities to have these conversations within existing processes and existing projects. And you gave the example of River Valley Modernization, District Planning, Zoning Bylaw Renewal. Have you raised this with those teams as well?
I'm not sure what you mean, which teams?
Have you raised the desire to integrate watershed management into those existing processes? Like, have you been to some of the engagements, for example? Have you flagged this for those project teams?
I guess indirectly, because that has our prime interest, is protection of the River Valley and the ravines. And we have contributed to all of those processes from that perspective. But we are bringing it forward to Council today in response to what the administration have said. And they clearly are recommending that all of these recommendations and ideas be embedded in city bylaws. And so that's what we are supporting and saying. It's time to have protection of the watershed a higher priority instead of a sidebar in development decisions. And that's why we're here today. We agree with what administration is saying. We just think that it could be expedited rather than an in-house search. We could actually come up with some results because there are going to be decisions made soon on rezoning and through the modernization process. And we think those could be good, and the district plans are effective tools, and there's no reason why watershed protections couldn't be embedded. And we look forward to working with the city on that.
Okay, well, I'll
by the
follow
way,
up with,
EPCOR is not considering all creeks based on the report administration has provided, and we would encourage that any process include all of the creeks, such as Kennard is missed out.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer, and I'll follow up with admin on some questions there. And then just to Ms. Neufeld, yeah, you know, I guess a larger question, wondering if you can just speak briefly to some of the analysis that's been done surrounding coal mining in the Rockies and how that affects our watershed, and you know, how is that conversation being held within existing bodies of work that are underway?
Yeah, so we did put together that previous risk assessment to drinking water and, you know, generally aquatic health in terms of coal mining effects and selenium increases in concentration, and we provided that, you know, a couple of years ago to council. The work is sort of is still existing, but because of the change in coal policy and the retraction of it, there are no new applications in the basin right now. The risk assessment remains the same. Once you expose waste rock, that is a legacy which you cannot essentially recover from. So it obviously needs to be really carefully considered in the application process. And this is where we were really leaning on the regional plan to do that, you know, that assessment, take that assessment into consideration, that those repercussions to fish, aquatic, and overall aquatic health, particularly in those headwater areas, is critically important, and it needs to have due process and extensive modeling, appropriate modeling to really understand what those change in concentrations are going to be and ensure that you're not going to do them. It hasn't been done anywhere. So, you know, you cannot mine waste rock like that and not have increased selenium concentrations at this point through the historical record. So, I'll just leave it there that the regional plan should set some priorities around that and understand that there are other issues, particularly aquatic health. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Jans?
Thank you. I want to get into that question of reporting. And so I'm picturing in my mind a digital dashboard that has a number of different metrics that can be updated on an annual or a X basis based on testing. I think that, we saw data from scientists about COVID levels in our river. We have heard about the dangers of excessive pesticide and salt and other additives that go into the runoff and then end up in the river. We've heard about this around salt and roadway issues. So I'm wondering, I'd like to hear from the public, like what are the metrics and where should a dashboard like that live? Should we be putting this on EPCOR? Should this be kind of a neutral third party like the university? Should the city of Edmonton be reporting out on this? I guess I'll direct that at Ms. Neufeld first.
Sure. So data sharing and data management has been a bit of an issue. You have multiple agencies collecting water quality data. The most comprehensive data set for the North Saskatchewan River is actually collected by EPCOR, but that data is not currently public. We've made a commitment under the Water for Life Action Plan to make that data public and accessible. And so what we've done is we've developed the Healthy River Ecosystem Assessment Tool, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's a dashboard, and it's going to be a public-facing dashboard that puts all the GIS layers that ABMI creates, all the water quality data that the government of Alberta gets, Alberta Lake Management Society, essentially all the water quality data available for the basin on one dashboard so that you can look at it and you can do that assessment right there, and it's updated regularly. All the data is held on the golden...
Exciting. What sort of sorry to interrupt. I just have a limited time. What sort of timeline are you looking at for that?
We are ready to launch it any day now. We're just doing some quick bug fixes on the end, just because we think there's going to be a lot of use. The platform's developed for the North Saskatchewan, and it's been a prototype for that is going to be rolled out for the whole province under the Alberta Water Council Source Water Protection. So we sort of spontaneously did it because of this data management issue, but it's got all the land use data, all the water quality data, all the hydrometric station. It's got statistical analysis built in. You can look at land use change through time, and all the data will be on there. And we have a commitment to put all EPCOR's ambient creek and river data on there back to our historical record for that. And so it won't be Excel files anymore. It'll be publicly accessible, publicly available.
Yeah, in an open data format?
Yes, and will all be on DataStream. The Gordon Foundation has DataStream, which houses all this citizen science data, as well as any sort of public data that the province has, and the EPCOR is putting their data on. City of Calgary already has their data on there, so we'll be putting our data publicly on there. The Healthy River Ecosystem Assessment Tool pulls from that data through an API, computer talking to computer, and so that will be viewed. But then we have other data sources.
How about other stats, public health interest, like levels of cocaine in the river, or COVID, or
Yeah, every parameter that is monitored will goes onto DataStream and then gets pulled in there. And there's 400 parameters on there now, so it's a little cumbersome to scroll through. And then you can start to see where those data gaps are. Where you might want to do additional monitoring, and it will be public. So it won't be, one person saying this, or it's to have a common ground of knowledge so that we can move forward for protecting our river.
Can I jump over to Ms. Duncan maybe? So from the community perspective, I'd love to hear your response to that.
It's interesting to hear that Calgary is already posting the data, but here, of course, we have EPCOR doing it. That remains worrisome to me. I would hope that the city also has a voice in it. I think it's important that the public have input into what parameters they think might be a priority for testing. And it is encouraging if it's, is it going to be posted annually, or is it going to be posted as the tests are done, and how often are the tests done? Those are the kind of questions that I would ask for the validity of the data, and where in the creeks and where in the river is the testing occurring, and could that vary over time based on some problems that arise?
Okay, thank you. I'm almost out of time, but yeah, I'd love to follow this up offline. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you very much. I've had it posed in other committee on community and public services that the city should be establishing an office of the environment. Would that be an adequate alternative, or do you think it should be something independent outside of EPCOR in the city?
Are you asking me?
Yes, maybe.
Okay.
Because you're the one that's suggesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for raising that. That is something that a good number of organizations have been asking for. We used to have a Natural Areas Office, and I actually chaired the Natural Area Advisory Council, and we did a lot of good work on conservation and protection of the natural areas. Unfortunately, neither of those exist anymore, and there have been concerns that with the needs arising for climate change and water quality and protection of our watershed, there is a need to be taking a second look. There is some concern that we only have a division called Roads and Parks, and that maybe we need to be having a separate agency that actually concentrates on looking at environmental and health protection and biodiversity and so forth. So yes, we certainly would support that.
Okay, and by separate agency, are you
I just mean within the city.
Within the city?
Within
okay,
the city.
okay. And thank you very much for the information from Creek Watch. I did take a look at a couple of creeks in Ward Smomy-Tappy and the results that they've posted there. And I am a little bit concerned about the increasing levels of chloride, phosphorus, ammonia, nitrogen. What sort of impact, and I don't know if anybody can answer this here, what sort of impact does that have on our ecosystem?
Kyle, would you like to speak to that?
Well, we've got a watershed scientist up on the screen. Perhaps Steph would be best placed.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, so because we really didn't start doing a lot of water quality testing on our streams until the city was largely developed, it's very difficult to quantify those effects. So, even to understand what the previous fish populations would be, that sort of, that knowledge is lost. And so, we can look at water quality in our creeks, and we can compare it to aquatic ecosystem health guidelines, like we do in the agricultural streams upstream, and they are impacted streams. There are absolutely no doubt that they're impacted streams. Everything that we have on our landscape, when you walk out and you see your gutter, and all of that washes into our streams, and so it's a collective problem. We have quantified what the loads are to those streams. And as Linda mentioned, we are only looking at 7 at the moment. We're hoping to expand that, but we are looking at those 7 urban tributaries, and that data is public. But to look at those aquatic ecosystem health, you need to really make it a priority, and you need to get in there, but you really need to understand that reference condition. And we don't have a reference condition. We know that during rainfall events, those streams are quite flashy. We're seeing, lots of erosion, and then base flow is reduced. We know that fish populations have likely changed based on the water quality. And so, it is a process of restoration, and a collective restoration, and to prioritize the water quality data and the aquatic ecosystem health monitoring, to partner with researchers, and to get, we look lots at our mountain streams, we look at lots of our headwater streams, but we've forgotten our urban streams a little bit. And I think we need to start to refocus and reprioritize. And that's our hope with the Urban Creeks Watershed Project, is to start to do that assessment and get a comprehensive assessment. There are a lot of technical reports hidden, and the city has done a lot of technical reports over the years, and I've kind of gathered those, and it's crazy to see some of them are from the 1950s, 1970s, but they're sort of lost. And so these need to come to the forefront. So we're working on a ArcGIS storyboard, which will summarize each of the creeks, summarize the current state of knowledge, sort of like the watershed plans. But again, that's a collaborative process, and we've just started. So we're working on that. The impacts, there certainly are impacts to the stream. We do exceed guidelines in general. A lot of aquatic health guidelines, not for pesticides really, but for nutrients, nitrate, ammonia, E. coli in some cases, but that's a recreational guideline. And that data is available. It's now, what are we going to do about it collectively to start to restore them?
Oops, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all our speakers. It's been illuminating. I just want to follow up on Councillor Wright's questions. You had said that some information had been lost basically to history because we didn't measure it. However, I'm just wondering if there are surrounding communities that may have been measuring. I know that the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance has a lot of excellent information. Do we draw from those as well as a sort of compare contrast? I think that would go to Steph.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that the Sturgeon River watershed, it's an alliance of the North Saskatchewan, and all that data is actually on DataStream right now. We really do understand what to monitor on our creeks. We have been monitoring them since the early 90s. We just need to get that data public. Sturgeon isn't necessarily a good reference because it's a very slow-moving agricultural stream, and it doesn't have the same incised valleys that our creeks do. And so it's really, we do have the knowledge and the scientific knowledge to put those pieces together and determine the effects. We just need to do it, and I think prioritize that effort. And I think that's where we're going.
Okay, so in your mind, what do we need to do in order to prioritize this and actually get it moving?
So I think the first start is in my mind, because I started it, was the Urban Creeks Watershed project. I've asked the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance to potentially consider those as an urban creeks. We get together, we look at what the land use is currently, what we hindcast what the previous hydrology is. We share the water quality data, and then we collectively decide what we want those streams to look like. And then we set tangible motions in place to address that.
Right. Okay, thank you. Linda, maybe I'm being too familiar with everyone. Ms. Duncan. So after hearing all of this, if you were to give committee sort of a bullet points of what you feel everyone is looking for here, in the simplest terms, because we are simple people, what would that look like? What would those bullet points be?
Thank you, Councillor. We are encouraged that we're stepping up the water quality testing. But as the administration has pointed out, watershed planning involves more than just water. It's also land. And so I guess what we would recommend is that direction be given to the administration to make sure that they infuse into the already going initiatives at the city, the modernization process, the ARP development for the River Valley, the district planning and the rezoning, is that there's be more attention to watershed planning and including the impacts of land use decisions in those decisions. That's what we would recommend. We know the city has a lot on their plate. This isn't the time of year when people want to think about parks. They want to think about snow removal. Sorry, I raised that topic. So we think it may be cost effective and useful and may expedite a good watershed plan if we make use of those initiatives and then reach out to the public who have been participating and saying, can we also hear your views on this, and maybe reach out to the experts who've been advising.
You're on mute, Councillor Paquette. Sorry, bud.
Sorry, I was being overly courteous. I do know that we were told that attachment 2 shouldn't be taken too seriously because there was work already being done. But in your view, we just need clarity on exactly what's being done, at what pace, and is it good enough? Would that sum it up?
That sums it up. We don't think it should be left to EPCOR the city has decided to turn over to EPCOR to do the watershed planning. And we value the work of EPCOR, and they're doing good work. But it is the city that has the power to eventually enact bylaws and so forth, and has the governance responsibility. So we want to make sure that the city also makes use of its good initiatives that are ongoing.
Okay, thank you. I believe that's all the questions we have of our speakers. Just waiting for technology to catch up if it has to. So thank you very much again for your attendance here. I appreciate you taking the time to visit us, and thank you for your presentations. We'll go back to now questions of administration, but before that, Mr. Beckett, anything on this one? I'm not sure that you have anything, but.
No, I didn't see a lot of regulatory stuff here.
No, me either. Thank you. So, questions to administration. Councillor Salvador.
Yeah, thank you. So just wanted to follow up on a few questions and comments that were raised by speakers. So yeah, Ms. Duncan talked about a desire to see watershed management integrated into some of our existing processes and projects like River Valley modernization, district planning, zoning bylaw renewal. I'm just looking for some comments on that and how that perspective is or is not integrated into existing work.
Sure, Councillor. Kent Snyder here. So absolutely, as we know, we've got a web, and we've heard a web of different policies and regulations that the city and others can apply at different scales. And so we also then have a number of different projects like district planning, which is looking at districts, large geographic areas, or zoning bylaw, which is looking at individual lots. And then the River Valley modernization work as well, looking at a River Valley system. And all those are important pieces of work and do address different scales in our city. And some of them do absolutely have components of watershed planning baked into them. But what we're suggesting and what this report is suggesting is that a framework will allow us to identify what needs to be done at what scale and embedded in what piece of tools or utilization of what tools we can use. So absolutely, they are in there, and we can layer in the future as well any of the findings from the framework of missing gaps.
Okay, excellent. So if I'm conceiving of this correctly, the development of the framework for watershed management sort of allows, oh gosh, I'm going to use a pun, allows things to flow down or to sort of filter down to other layers, including the ones that were mentioned around, zoning bylaw, district planning, et cetera. Is that correct in the way that I'm thinking about it?
That is correct, and just to clarify too, there are elements that we know to date that will be embedded and infused in them from day one, but we know that there's a lot more that can be done as well, so that's what that will be helpful with.
Okay, excellent. And then I also wanted to just ask about the unknown timing of the NSRP and when that will be revisited and what content we'd expect to see in that. So given that it is unknown, have we done any advocacy to, I guess, speed that up? And would that be helpful at this time?
Administration is currently working on a stakeholder advocacy approach for a lot of the work on the climate and environment file. So we're hoping to have that work completed in early 2023, and so would probably not recommend advocacy points of view until after Q2 of next year.
Okay, well, I appreciate the clarity there. I will, yield the rest of my time to colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Tang.
Yeah, thank you. I guess just to follow up on that, given that there's so much layers and different work going on, but it does sound like the North Saskatchewan Regional Plan is a bit of a gap here that is sort of the coalescing force that brings things together a little bit. Would you agree with that?
That is correct in terms of beyond our municipal borders, boundaries. We've got the tools in place. But looking regionally, and that's what Watershed does, is a larger scale. Correct, that is a current gap.
And then City of Calgary comes up and just wanted to confirm that they do have a regional plan in place that was done a few years ago, and that really contributed to some of that cohesion policy work. Would you say?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. Recognizing that there is a bit of a timeline that you're not looking for any direction until perhaps after some of this initial work for early 2023 will be done. Because I was contemplating on perhaps that a motion for maybe Q3 or after Q2. Would that be helpful now, or do you think we should revisit it once you bring back this report? And I don't know if there is a report contemplated to come back around that Q2.
So, Councillor, I think we wouldn't necessarily need any additional motions or help in that regard. And when we do come back, we can give an update. And if something emerges before we come back, we absolutely will bring that forward if we think there's timing issues of getting some advocacy moving faster.
Yeah, because I think we've heard from several different perspectives, and there's different efforts also, at the I guess the RMA level, and there's also community level, very grassroots, and also some of the alliances level. So I am interested in to kind of help this process along. But I also hear you, and I will hold off on that and wait to see what comes forth in your early 2023. And I think the other piece that I just want to be clear, following up on Councillor Salvador's first line of questioning around that drawing upon existing work currently in the zoning bylaw renewal and the district planning engagement. I'm curious if you have any preliminary just data and what our residents, what our Edmontonians do these topics about watershed and our river valley, et cetera, come up during those engagement sessions.
So, Councillor, in terms of district planning and the zoning bylaw, I'm not certain of if that has emerged as a primary leading topic, but definitely in the ribbon of green and river valley modernization, protecting those bodies of water and the biodiversity and the ecological health and how that relates to adjacent development is absolutely something on the mind of Edmontonians.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then I guess in my maybe final minute, I was curious about that River for Life policy. It's from 2012. But I guess what I'm hearing is that there's just a lot of activities pending NSRP status that is looking to keep any water-related policies up to date.
Specific to River for Life policy, that's now with EPCOR and is part of their integrated resource management plan and their source water protection planning. In terms of River for Life strategy, which is the provincial effort, I'm wondering if Danielle Kolyak, the acting general supervisor in environmental policy and climate policy, has any update on the work the province is doing to update River for Life strategy.
Yeah, thanks. I think you might mean the Water for Life strategy is the provincial update. And so right now they're working on updating the new next 5-year action plan to fill the Water for Life goals. And so we've been working as part of the larger municipality sector with City of Calgary and EPCOR to identify what municipalities could commit to for those next 5 years. And that includes a lot of the things we've talked about, like open data, research and knowledge, information sharing, climate resilience action, stormwater management, that type of stuff. So that work is underway right now, and I believe it will be going back to the province, I think, sometime in June of next year. But I would need to double check that date.
Okay, great. It's good to see momentum. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson?
Yes, thank you so much for the report. It was really, gave me a moment of pause to just be reminded that we have no other drinking source for drinking water, than the river. So really, really emphasize the importance of this work to me through this report. So I appreciate the discussion we've had around sort of the framework approach. I like the idea of sort of the different scales of what we're looking at. And I mean, and I think there's also, you know, for the zoning bylaw, I was thinking, oh, there's implications around site coverage, but then we also have sort of the on-site drainage requirements as well. So some of those things may be taking care of themselves in those processes as well, but appreciate the holistic approach that you're going to take. So just from my understanding as well, so will you identify through the desktop study any bylaw and budget implications coming out of that? Like you may come forward to us with a request for more resources to undertake further work or specific bylaws?
Yes, that's the intent, is to identify where we can apply our tools and our regulatory approaches to achieve the broader goals. And there could be resource requirements. I highly doubt that. I think we have the tools available to do the work. It's just identifying where the best places to insert those rules would be.
Great. And I'm just interested in the implications of potentially bringing bylaws forward in advance of the North Saskatchewan, the NSRP, I forget what that stands for.
Yeah, and pardon me, NSRP, I'll let Christine answer that. That's the North Saskatchewan Regional Plan.
Thank you, Councillor. Christina Hodgson from La Branch. There are implications. We would have to follow essentially whatever the province told us within that document. So if there was overlap, we may have to redact certain portions of a bylaw or change it. And if the bylaw is passed under the charter regulation, that is a long process.
Okay, so we would not be out of line to pass the bylaw, but if it did conflict with the subsequent NSRP, then we have a lot of redo work to do.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, that's a tricky balance to strike, and I think speaks to the importance of the provincial advocacy that we look forward to you guiding us on. The only final question I had, and I don't know if someone in the delegation can answer. I noted in attachment 1, I believe that EPCOR ratepayers are contributing $1 million towards river water monitoring, which I think is a great investment, but just wondering if we've looked for cost sharing with the rest of the watershed for that, so that it's not strictly EPCOR ratepayers that are bearing that cost.
We don't have the answer for you at this time.
Not to worry, we can follow up offline on that. Again, I think it's a worthwhile investment, but just wanting to ensure that all benefiting partners are contributing to that work as well. Great, no other questions. Thank you so much for the good work.
Thank you. No further questions then, but no motion on the floor. So is there...
Happy to move receipt of information.
Okay. There's no other motions contemplated? No? No. Okay. So receipt of information is on the floor. Presuming there's no questions on that. Anyone to speak?
Yeah, so I've got something, Mr. Chair.
To speak or questions? Or
to speak.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Paquette. Thank you.
Okay, so hearing that the work that is asked for by our speakers is underway is comforting. I am actually not quite sure if it's going far enough or if it actually does need a motion. So while I will vote to accept this for information, if in I'm assuming it's Q1 of 2023, we do not see the concerns addressed at that point, I probably will make a motion in order to direct that work. And that's just a heads up for the administration as well and for EPCOR, because I think we should be doing all these things very transparently and give everyone a chance to actually engage in sort of the needs of the watershed and of the community, and to do it in a good and a right way. And if the report shows that we're maybe perhaps being a little bit lackadaisical on that or not paying attention to the details, as I said, a motion will absolutely be forthcoming, and it will probably be stronger than a motion I would have made today. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Councillor Paquette. Councillor Tang?
Yeah, great, thank you very much. I think all I just really want to say is, I think there's a lot of interest. It's water. It's incredibly important to the lives and the livelihood of Edmontonians and surrounding communities and to Alberta. And I just based on a lot of the comments, and I take point to a lot of the speakers around some of the piece around process. Around the role that the city does versus EPCOR, I think those are all actually quite valid. And it sounds like it's worthwhile if administration can reach back out to some of these stakeholders for just to make sure that we are on the same page. I'm actually quite heartened by some of the work that's happening by our regional partners, other municipalities, rural communities, and I really think we need to be, I don't know, doubling down is the right word, but really help to reinforce some of those efforts. To me, one of the key missing pieces in all of this is that cohesive force that brings everything together. So I would agree with Councillor Paquette. I was thinking of something, but I'm not going to kind of add that in what is a very busy time to administration, but we'll be keeping an eye out for that. I will be also keeping an eye out on the Heritage River work. I think that's, I think it's fair to explore all the tools that we will have. And I look forward to hearing about some of that dashboard work that's going to be coming forth, and will be interesting to see how not only EPCOR but really how the city is really getting involved in that. So thank you for this report.
Great, thank you. Councillor Stevenson?
No, just to say thank you again, and very excited to see the ongoing evolution of this work. Thanks.
Great, thank you then. Please vote on receipt of information.
In favor.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We have all the vote.
Please display the vote. That is carried. So thank you very much again. See you soon. This takes us then to item 7.3, Blatchford Renewable Energy Utility Business Plan.
Just some opening comments by Christian.
Yeah, good morning, councillors. My name is Christian Falski. I'm the Director of Renewable Energy Systems with IIS. With me today is Adam Laughlin, Tom Lumsden. We also have Jeff Olson and Claudia Pooley from our legal group in attendance to answer any questions. In 2016, City Council approved the development of a district energy sharing system and set up Blatchford Renewable Energy as a new city-owned utility to support the vision of a carbon-neutral development supplied with 100% renewable energy. District energy systems have been identified as the most effective approach for many cities to transition to sustainable heating and cooling by improving energy efficiency and enabling higher shares of renewable. District energy represents a key action in Edmonton's community energy transition and climate resilience adaptation strategies, and the associated greenhouse gas reductions and use of renewable energy are connected to Edmonton's climate resilience indicators and the city plan strategic measures. Today, we are here to provide an update on Blatchford Renewable Energy's business plan, including an overview of the development of the utility with a focus on the next 4 years of operation. Since the presentation of the last business plan in 2021, the development of the utility has progressed in several ways, including over 2 years of providing services for the first and growing number of residents in Blatchford, planning and designing future utility infrastructure, updating the utility's master plan, and advancing the utility's rate structure and design. The utility has been set up to build in stages, which allows for both prudent operational and financial management and the opportunity for the system to evolve and change based on overall land development and builder construction timelines. and for anticipated future innovation in renewable energy technology. Over the next 4 years, the utility will focus on the next stages of its development, including expanding the infrastructure in the first community energy center to support additional residential development, and building out the next phase of the distribution piping network, which is the infrastructure needed to move the energy from the energy centers to the homes in the community. Additionally, the previously approved utility master plan, which provides a roadmap for development of the district energy infrastructure, has identified a sewer heat exchange system as the next large renewable energy facility to be built. While this business plan includes the sewer heat exchange energy center, an update to the original business case for this energy center will be brought forward during the upcoming 23 to 26 budget deliberations, including looking at other alternatives to further grow Blatchford renewable energy with councils in line with council's vision, while also recognizing the need for prudent fiscal and operational development. The Blatchford vision serves as the roadmap for the community's development, and the district energy sharing system plays a critical role in achieving the long-term goal of carbon neutrality and use of 100% renewable energy. Blatchford, including the renewable energy utility, demonstrates leadership in community design and climate resilience. While a large district energy system exists globally, we are currently building one of the largest district energy sharing systems in Canada. The system proves Edmonton the opportunity to be a leader in renewable energy systems and to support a low-carbon future. Thank you very much, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you. We'll go to Councillor Stevenson. I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Beckett, any comments? Thank you.
Really, this is just a budget presentation. It's not a rate application, so I don't have a lot to add to this, but I'm going to encourage the committee, when they do receive the rate application, to look very, very closely at the capital plans, because this development has developed more slowly, I think, than everybody expected. And when that occurs, the time for large capital investments probably needs to be thought through very, very carefully. So that would be my advice, is to look at that when it's available, and focus on risk management on a going forward basis.
Great, thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, thank you so much. It was really great to read this report, and I can pass along that the Blatchford residents delight in their guilt-free air conditioning during the hot summer. So it is definitely something that's appreciated there. I'm going to start at an extremely granular level just to clarify some technical points, and then have some broader questions as well. I just wanted to dig into some of the financial information that was provided in Appendix 2. So in Appendix 2 on page 29, it notes about 3,300 customers over the 2023-2026 budget cycle. But on page 10, it's closer to 1,100. Just wondering if there's a distinction there between accounts versus people customers. Yeah, so page 10, I had to add up some numbers, but I got to about 1,100 with what was listed.
Yeah, and it certainly speaks also to what Mr. Beckett just said, some of the slower development in the site, and there's likely some clarification between accounts and customers.
Okay, and so Appendix 2 is sort of the initial business case that hasn't necessarily been changed?
That is correct.
Okay, so that would account as well for, I think it anticipates a net cash positive by 2025, but again, page 15 is suggesting that it'll be a bit later. Okay, no, that's really helpful, and when you come forward with the capital budget, some of that will be updated?
Yes, it will be.
Great. Okay, perfect. Maybe just to the $93 million cash infusion, can you talk me through some of the options that we have for that? So I know there have been some grants that have been applied for. There's discussion of third party. Have we thought about even from retained earnings? Just what are some thoughts around that?
Yes, that's correct. So I don't remember when, but we had a report in front of this committee a few years ago, which outlines in principle 5 options to close this $93 million at this time gap. Obviously, the preferred option is to receive grants, and we've applied, and we're currently in the process of applying for further grants. We haven't been successfully up to this point. The other options, obviously, I think Utility Committee and City Council are looking at rate changes and increase rates and revenues to the utility. The opportunity to cover that gap through retained earnings from the land development project. So these are our options which were presented. Obviously, there's a likelihood and a wish list to which comes first. We're working hard on getting the grants, but so far we haven't been successful.
Yeah, and I think, we could maybe chat offline too in terms of some of the advocacy that we can be doing with, if it's federal government, provincial government on that. And that was actually, something very interesting, if I understood correctly in the report, is that, the rates were set to be, equal or equivalent to what the rest of Edmonton ratepayers might be paying. But because of the significant cost increases on other utilities, there's a growing gap there. So would that lead to Blatchford residents potentially seeing an increase?
The short answer is yes. I think what we're seeing globally, but also in locally, is an increase in costs, specifically natural gas costs, and also some of the carbon levies applied from the federal government, as an example. So all of that has led to a widening gap between what we define as business as usual, and you said this is sort of like the fiscal policy council put in place for this utility, and between what we're actually charging. So we'll come forward with the budget and the rate filing to address that. So it will likely we will likely see higher increases. But I think it's important to notice that we're still applying the fiscal policy of council to say that we're still actually likely going to be under the business as usual, but we're trying to make our ways to get back to where we were.
Which seems very sensible. And I will have one more round, but I noticed that the utility itself uses 94% renewable energy. How are you procuring the green energy?
So for the utility, this is what we're supplying. So that's basically our effort, our energy effort into heating and cooling the homes comes from 94%. And that's actually an estimation, because we're using some peaking natural gas boilers, which we're actually right now are not using, because we have 45 connected facilities right now.
I'll actually pick up there. So that 94% is what we're supplying, what the utility is supplying. The utility is consuming electrical energy from the grid.
That is correct.
Any of that renewable?
Yeah, we're offsetting this through, the city has a contingent of renewable energy credits, and we're offsetting that piece like we do for many other facilities and operations.
Do we have a proportion? Like what proportion is being offset?
100%.
100%. Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
good. I lost my other question. Oh, the boilers. Have they been operated? Have we had to turn them on?
No, we haven't. We have been able to supply basically 100% renewable energy. The number is just for the case that we have to take them on, like when the system is down. The system hasn't been down, so the number actually should have been 100%.
Oh, really? Okay. I'd like a little bit more information about those energy credits. Just the calculation on that, because if we're offsetting 100% of the Blatchford utility consumption, then what other consumption does the city have that is not being credited? That kind of a calculation. I don't know if that's readily available, but it doesn't have to be right now, of course. But yeah.
Okay, that's not our office, but I think we can get that information.
That's more of a council question. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So then, to Mr. Beckett's point, we're going to have the rate filing in 3 weeks-ish, November 25th. And that's where we get into the calculus of rates versus capital plan versus $95 million injection versus all of that that algorithm, that very complicated algorithm of the money.
That is correct. And as I mentioned, we're obviously looking at the sewer heat facility right now as a big money item, big capital investment coming forward. So we're bringing forward a business case which looks at some alternatives for that, also addressing some of the points Mr. Beck has mentioned in terms of like the pace of the development and also the cost and the fiscal health of the community, and the question about the 93 million or the funding gap to address that.
It sounds from the report like the sewer heat exchange project that the energy gain on that might not be what we first expected. Is that right or wrong?
It depends what you mean with first. Like when we started in 2015, that's what we expected. In the meantime, we expected a bit more, or we saw there's an opportunity for more, which then again had to be reduced through some changes from EPCOR in terms of the sewer flow. The sewer heat facility overall can still, we think it's in design stages, can still produce a significant amount of heating and cooling for the system. So it's still a reasonable approach to move forward. If it's the reasonable approach for the overall long-term goal and the question again Mr. Beckett raised, that's what we're bringing forward with the budget and the rate filing.
Okay, and then in terms of what of the service we provide, so on what the utility supplies, does that have to progress sequentially south to north, or could you essentially leapfrog to development farther north and simply run essentially the loop lines or the supply lines up to that, or does it have to be sequential?
So technically, if there's a pipe in the ground, we can provide that. That's a matter of obviously pumping capacity and other things. So not necessarily. Overall, I think if you want to look at the full picture of the utility, we'll have individual energy centers across the development, which will supply energy to the system, which will then obviously provide energy to the building. So not necessarily, but it could be, if it's too far away, it could be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, right? Either pumping capacity or line losses on the temperature, what have you. Yeah, okay.
Correct.
And then just final question, that Appendix 2 that's included here, that's going to be updated in the rate filing. That will be superseded effectively?
Yes, that's the expectation.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Councillor Tang?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for this update. I think for me, I have some clarifying questions on specific pages. But I guess more also broadly in that section around just strategic goals. I didn't really see increasing builder activity or construction of housing as a strategic goal. I guess I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
Well, I consider this, when I speak about the utility, that our goal is to be there when the builders are going to be there and the building's going to be built. And that's sort of like our main operational focus, right? And we've achieved that so far. So when we obviously plan the utility, we're very much linked at the hip with the development of Blatchford in terms of when land is sailed and when the builders come and build, when people move in. So I think our goal as a utility is to, well, not our goal, our meaning should be to be there when the builder is building and connecting with the builder.
And then there's a section about builders can try to exempt from connecting to the energy system, but I'm like, doesn't that defeat the whole purpose?
So that was a decision council took very early in the project, that it's not a mandatory connection to the utility.
Got it.
It becomes important because the ability to be connected to the district energy system is actually enhancing the ability to be net zero carbon. So that's something council put in place very early at the beginning of the utility.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And I was wondering, for those who have moved in so far, glad to hear that they can be guilt-free about the air conditioning that they use. But I'm wondering, just generally, have we done sort of a satisfaction survey with those residents?
So we have right now 45 homes connected. We actually kind of like know many of our customers. We haven't done a survey so far, but we hear very positive responses from the folks who moved in.
Yeah, and then for those provincial and federal grants, obviously you're in conversation about kind of why we haven't been successful, and kind of and when you say you're continuously applying, you're not always looking at the same opportunity, or are you kind of looking at different things as they emerge?
We're working closely with our partners in finance to target which opportunities are best available to us on the basis of this. So yes, it's an active and ongoing, and has been since 2016. So we continue to push.
Yeah. And apologies, because I feel like I've been swarming in documents lately, but that $58 million for the sewer energy center, that's in the capital ask this time, correct?
That's in the business plan.
Okay.
When we bring forward the budget, we bring forward a capital budget and an operating budget together with the rate filing.
Okay.
And that will come in about 3 weeks.
Okay, got it.
However, Christian has flagged that we are constantly looking at to Mr. Beckett's comments, what's the best way forward from a capital investment perspective, and you may see things that are different in terms of what we're identifying as priorities.
I see. And then when you put forward those, and you'll indicate like what checkpoint this funding will get us to, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. Okay. I had a similar question about the cash infusion, but I think that's been answered. And then I guess page 21, for that breakdown of that table 4, have you also presented a similar breakdown of investment made in 2019, 2022, just for comparison?
We haven't in this plan, but we will in the capital. So there's basically the approved capital budget, and then this is basically identifying the projected capital budget, except what Adam just mentioned.
Okay, great, thank you. And then page 20, that graph, so just so I understand, that's the difference between what the current Blatchford residents are paying for utility per month minus what the current non-Blatchford resident is paying per month. Is that correct?
That is correct. And what's important here is the tendency of that line, because with increasing natural gas costs and increasing carbon tax, the gap will widen, and we'll need to work on with the utility work on that.
I just have one final question. Page 22, for that potential engagement for third party to support long-term growth, is that like, what's the third party, what is this business development or?
So when the utility was put in place, council always had the motion of at some point to engage an external partner that could be in various ways to help deliver and operate the utility. That has not happened up to this point because we're still very young in terms of development, and but in the next 4 years we'll likely look at this opportunity again and see what options are out there to partner with private industry.
Like a P3?
I think long-term, our desire is that the City of Edmonton isn't the utility operator.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. I'm scrambling to see if I can answer my own question, but just wanted to confirm the motion I had made around an unfunded service package coming forward to explore some of the expansion of the district energy system outside of the Blatchford neighborhood. Just want to confirm that would help address, I think there's mentions of opportunities with Nate and other surrounding property owners. Just want to make sure that's covered.
Yes, so it's covered. It comes forward with the budget again. We have a direct conversation with Nate about an opportunity there, and all of that would obviously have to be carefully considered, explored, and it might be an opportunity to grow, to increase the carbon footprint reduction, but it also needs to be in the financial constraints of the utility can or cannot do.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting relationship that I'm still learning between, like, having more customers isn't always cost effective in building out a utility in some ways, but.
Mr. Beckett is a very experienced person.
That's a typical regulatory problem. If the incremental cost of serving the next customer is higher than the average cost, then rates go up. And with inflation heating up and some of the more expensive technology that's being proposed, that is a concern. But and I would like to mention that anybody who's living at Blatchford and running their air conditioner last summer should feel just a tiny little bit guilty, because look at this rate comparison here.
It's true. It's true. But thank you. I appreciate the ongoing education about how we start up a utility. Some smaller things, you know, I have heard some challenges with one builder in particular at Blatchford, just around some of the utility room requirements and having, just the upfront cost in terms of that infrastructure fee. Just wondering, first of all, I understand that there are probably evolving standards, that there's room for flexibility and adaptation in those requirements moving forward. And just if we're modeling out sort of what a shift from sort of service fee over infrastructure fee looks like.
So we are obviously in constant discussion with builders, with all builders who come to Blatchford. We've developed requirements which we are always updating and improving as we can. The utility needs certain service requirements, and we need certain space for our equipment, because some of that equipment is in the builder's building. So we work with the builders, but we also need to ensure that we can operate and maintain that infrastructure as we should.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenging balance, but I really appreciate that flexible approach that you're taking, and you know, think that those things will evolve as well as that moves forward. Just finally, a last one. I understand that ATCO is still installing gas infrastructure in the neighborhood, even though I think the intent is that we're not using natural gas, you know, for residential use. I understand that that's a requirement of the franchise agreement, but just wondering if that's how we want to be building this community, and if we want to revisit that in any way.
That's partly a legal question, but I'll try. So the bylaw, the utility bylaw we have in place, can only speak to thermal energy requirements. So that natural gas line cannot be used for the production of thermal energy, right? It can be used for non-thermal application, like a barbecue or a stove. So that's the power we have through the utility bylaw.
Well, I guess maybe just to Mr. Beckett, if it's for you, like, it just seems like a high infrastructure cost for ATCO ratepayers to have infrastructure to be installed that will likely be fairly lowly, like, underused potentially.
Yeah, I think that's correct. It's if I lived in Blatchford, I would want to know that I could have a gas barbecue. And I wouldn't want to pay more to operate my gas barbecue than somebody who's not living in Blatchford. So you try and keep societal issues out of utility rate making, but you can't always do it. And so that I think you've put your finger on a good example of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Paquette.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move receipt of information. And I actually don't have any questions because they've all been asked.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. I don't see any further questions then for administration, so I'll go to Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to move that the November 4th, 2022 Integrated Infrastructure Services Report, IIS 01397, be received for information.
Thank you. Motion on the floor. I'm sorry, Councillor Paquette, did I move that? Did you already move the recommendation?
Oh, he did? Sorry.
All right. I was going to go to the word councillor, but that's okay. We'll.
Oh, no.
So motion's on the floor. Anyone speaking to the motion? Councillor Paquette, you're on mute. Anyone speaking to the motion? You're still on mute, Councillor Paquette.
bad old habits of when we used to get that massive echo effect. So I do have something to say, but I will defer to the ward councillor if.
I don't think it matters. So it's on the floor. Okay. That's fine. Yeah.
All right. Well, I will just say that it's actually a very positive report. I had my doubts, and I still have my concerns, and Mr. Beckett raised them very aptly regarding equity. But I do understand that that this is something that the city's embarking on, and there are a lot of learnings that we're getting out of this. I'm not sure how sustainable the pricing model is for the far future, but for now, I believe it makes sense. I know there's been some consternation and concern about the pace of development in Blatchford. But at least there is this thing that is moving according to plan, and that's a positive. And one can only hope that because we generally have the power systems handled, that development will follow. But this is one of the good news stories of the city. Yeah, I initially, I will be frank, voted against this simply because of the equity concerns about residents in my ward, essentially in some way subsidizing residents in Blatchford. The dark cloud and silver lining simultaneously here is that there are actually a lot of residents in Blatchford who are taking advantage of that. So, but perhaps that will change. But again, those are some of my concerns and some of my kudos. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Councillor Stevenson?
Yes, just very briefly to reiterate my thanks to the team. I think when we see reports like this, it's easy to forget the broader context that this is a huge and bold thing that we're doing. And I really want to celebrate that. I think, you know, it's not a straight line. It's going to be an evolution, but it's incredibly exciting. And I think there's been incredible progress and really, really positive outcomes so far. So thank you so much for the work. Very excited to see where we go next, and delighted to receive this for information.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Not seeing anyone. Councillor Paquette to close. Anything further?
That was both my introduction and close.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Please vote.
Waiting on one vote. Councillor Jans?
I'm a yes.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. We have all the vote.
Please display the vote. That is carried. That completes our work. Are there any notices of motion or motions without customary notice? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Have a great weekend.